welcome. The weather we got. Okay, now, good evening and welcome. The time is now 5:30. I would like to call the March 22nd, 2024 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council to order. Mr. Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Cindy Condon.
Here.
So Nancy, it's not, it doesn't seem like it's coming through.
Here. Nope. Get right to it, Cindy. Hello. Hello. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Okay. Should we do that again or are we good? For the third time? Yeah. Your choice. No, we're good. Mr. Secretary.
Okay. Marcy Grail.
Here.
Ann Byer.
Here.
Richard Devlin.
Present remotely.
Richard, are you able to hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay. Richard, I think you're muted, but I'm just going to verify that you're present.
I'm not muted.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We can't hear you, but I'm just going to go forward. And Katie Imes.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any agenda modifications today?
Madam Chair, no agenda modifications tonight.
Okay, thank you. I have the following announcements. Comment registration cards for tonight's public hearings are available on the table near the entrance to the room. For council members and anyone addressing the council, please remember to state your name clearly and please do not use the speakerphone feature. All right, eat it, I guess, as it will create feedback. Please mute your phones, and if you are joining us by phone and receive a phone call, please hang up from this call and dial back in after finishing your other call. For those signed in onto the webinar, please do not broadcast your webcam. If you want to receive future email notifications of council meetings, project milestones, or rulemakings through our Click Dimensions program, you can do so by clicking on the link in the agenda or on the council webpage. Look for the green box on the right-hand side of the page that says sign up for email updates. Generally, you would have a computer ready for you to sign up here, but it's not working now, and hopefully it will before the evening's out. So you are also welcome to access the online project mapping tool and any documents by visiting our website. Please note that the audio and video of this meeting are being recorded and may be posted to the council's website following the meeting. Energy Facility Council meetings shall be conducted in a respectful and courteous manner where everyone is allowed to state their positions at the appropriate times consistent with the council rules and procedures. Willful, accusatory, offensive, insulting, threatening, and insolent or slanderous comments which disrupt the council meeting are not acceptable. Pursuant to Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0080, any person who engages in unacceptable conduct which disrupts the meeting may be expelled. So with that, the next agenda item is for the Leaning Juniper 2A Amendment number 3, Draft Proposed Order, Public Hearing, and will include an information portion by Senior Siting Analyst Chase McVeigh Walker, who will give a brief overview of the agenda item and the amendment request, and a public hearing in which I will serve as the presiding officer. Mr. McVeigh Walker, please proceed with the information portion of the agenda item.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Condon. Good evening, Council, and members of the public who are here today. As Vice Chair Condon just indicated, my name is Chase McVeigh Walker, and I'm a Senior Siting Analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy. Additionally, as Vice Chair Condon mentioned, there are comment cards right outside the door. The comment cards for this agenda item are blue. So if anyone would in the room would like to make a public comment during the hearing, we ask that you fill out one of those blue comment cards prior to commenting. Today's agenda item A, is a combination of an informational overview of the request for Amendment 3 to the Leaning Juniper 2A site certificate, followed by a public hearing on the amendment request and the department's draft proposed order. And at the hearing itself will be an opportunity to provide public comment and testimony. We ordinarily have a computer set up to present a mapping tool that can be used to locate the facility, but it is not currently working. Now, the next couple slides, I'll provide a general overview of the Energy Facility Siting Council, the amendment review process, and public participation. Next slide, please. This slide provides a quick overview of this agenda item. As I just said, I'll provide a brief overview of the FSEC process and of the approved facility, as well as the amendment request itself. Then Vice Chair Condon will provide an overview of the public hearing, and we will conclude the agenda item with the public hearing itself, where members of the public may comment on the draft proposed order, the amendment request, or both. Council will also have an opportunity to make comments about any concerns they have related to the draft proposed order and or the amendment request. I did want to note that tonight's hearing is not the close of the public comment period on the draft proposed order or the amendment request. The public comment period deadline is 5:00 p.m. on March 29th, which is next Friday. After the close of the public comment period, the department recommends that council leave the record open for an additional business day for the certificate holder to respond to any and all public comments. And so the department's recommending council leave the record open until 5 p.m. on April 1st or later if requested. Next slide, please, Nancy. Okay. The Oregon Department of Energy's siting division has one primary objective, which is to follow its mandate established in 1975 to review large-scale energy projects for compliance with applicable standards and rules. For reference, siting refers to the technical permitting review of a proposed facility against a proposed or approved facility against a number of predetermined standards based on site-specific locational issues that may be affected by any particular facility. Please note that land acquisitions, land leases, and easements are all outside of the FSEC review process. The Oregon Department of Energy's siting division serves as staff to the Energy Facility Siting Council, which I'll be referring to as FSEC or council. The council consists of up to 7 members serving in a volunteer capacity. Council members are appointed by the governor and approved by the Oregon Senate and represent a diverse professional background from across the state, diverse locations as well. While the Oregon Department of Energy siting staff makes recommendations to FSEC, FSEC itself is the final decision-making authority for energy facilities under its jurisdiction, including the Leaning Juniper 2A facility and this amendment request. Next slide. This slide illustrates the major steps in the review of requests for amendment to an existing FSEC site certificate. Nancy, will you just click and see if there's an animation? There we go. Cool. This amendment request is being processed under the Type A amendment review process, which includes a few opportunities for public review and participation, including tonight's public hearing. The amendment process itself begins with when a certificate holder submits their preliminary request for amendment, and the preliminary request for amendment for the Leaning Juniper 2A facility was submitted to the department on September 22nd, 2023. Following the PASC, the preliminary or PRFA, preliminary request for amendment, the department provided public notice of the PRFA receipt, and that occurred on September 28th. In addition to the public notice, the department also initiated reviewing agency coordination on this amendment request. On February 9th of this year, 2024, the department deemed the amendment request complete, and on February 14th, the certificate holder submitted a complete request for amendment to the department. On February 29th, the department issued its draft proposed order for Amendment 3, as well as a public notice of the issuance of its draft proposed order and a request for comment on the amendment request. The draft proposed order contains the department's recommendations for council on the requested amendment, including recommendations for amended site certificate conditions and new conditions. As I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, the public comment period will not close until next Friday, March 29th. Following the close of the record, the department will review any comments received and will prepare responses to the comments for council's consideration. Once council has reviewed the draft proposed order and any and all comments received, the department will incorporate council's feedback into its proposed order, which is the next step in the process. When the department issues its proposed order, a public notice of the proposed order and contested case will also be issued. Because this amendment request is being evaluated as a Type A amendment, it allows for a possible contested case proceeding to occur. Only those persons who have raised a relevant issue in person at this meeting or in writing by the comment deadline on the draft proposed order may participate in the contested case. If held, the contested case proceeding would be run by an independent hearing officer. Following the deadline for the contested case hearing requests, or after the contested case proceeding has concluded, the council will review the proposed order and issue its final order, approving or denying the request for amendment. The final order's findings of facts and conclusions of law are based on the proposed order and the outcome of the contested case. The department will prepare, the department will prepare, and the chair will sign the final order and amended site certificate as approved and directed by council. Next slide, please, Nancy. There you go. Now I'll provide you with an overview of the approved Leaning Juniper 2A facility. The Leaning Juniper facility, Leaning Juniper 2A wind power facility, is a wind energy facility located in Gillum County within a site boundary of 6,404 acres. The facility consists of 43 wind turbines with a maximum blade tip height of 492 feet and a peak generating capacity of approximately 90.3 megawatts. The facility was originally approved and received its site certificate by council on September 21st, 2007. The certificate holder for the facility is Leaning Juniper Wind Power 2 LLC, who is a wholly owned subsidiary of Avangrid Renewables. Next slide, please. This slide represents the procedural history of this amendment request. As I mentioned, the department received the preliminary request for amendment in late September of last year, September 22nd, 2023. Following initial review of the preliminary request for amendment, the department determined that additional information was needed and made a request for additional information on November 21st, to which the certificate holder provided responses on December 15th. Then on February 9th of this year, February 9th, 2024, the department reviewed the RAI responses and determined that the amendment request, coupled with the RAI responses, contained sufficient information to make recommendations on all applicable standards, rules, and laws. So the amendment request coupled with the RAI responses equated to a complete application. And the certificate holder submitted a complete application on this amendment request on February 14th of this year. On February 29th, the department issued its draft proposed order and concurrently issued a public notice of the DPO issuance and of the comment period associated with this phase. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'm going to go over overview of the actual amendment request itself. The request for Amendment 3 to the Leaning Juniper 2A site certificate seeks council's approval for wind turbine upgrades to 36 of the 43 existing turbines. Those upgrades would include replacing the wind turbine rotors, nacelles, refurbishing the turbine generators, and reinforcing the turbine foundations. Also included in the amendment request was the installation of a new 34.5 kilovolt collector system and the decommissioning of 2 of the 43 existing turbines. Additionally, the amendment request would made the request to amend existing condition 27 to lower the minimum above ground wind turbine blade tip clearance from 30 to 21 meters for the 36 turbines proposed to be upgraded. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides are just visual representations of the proposed repower corridor within the existing site boundary. The repower corridor is on these next 2 slides is represented in that purple color, and the existing site boundary is the black outlined polygons. And each dot on these next 2 slides is a wind turbine location. So you can flip to the next slide, please. This one is just the northeastern portion of the facility, and the previous slide was the southwestern portion of the facility. So next slide, please, Nancy. All right. So the scope of council's review can be found in Division 27. And as far as the scope of comments is concerned for tonight, all comments are eligible as long as they relate to the amendment request and or to the department's draft proposed order. Next slide, please. Okay. In the department's draft proposed order, the department recommends that existing conditions or existing conditions with minor amendments were adequate to ensure that the facility with the changes proposed in request for amendment 3 complied with the standards shown on this screen. Accordingly, I'm not going to be presenting any additional information on any of the evaluation of these standards in this presentation. However, if council has any questions, feel free to chime in, and if I don't know or have a response, I'll come back to you at the next meeting with a response. So these I'm not going to go over. Now the next slide, please. The next 10 slides are standards that the department recommended varying levels of either amendments to existing conditions or new conditions be imposed for this amendment to comply with each respected standard. I'm not going to go through every single condition featured on each of these next 10 slides, but we'll rather pick conditions that are more unique or significant to discuss. That said, much like the standards I featured on the previous slide, if you have questions on a condition that I don't touch on, feel free to chime in and ask questions, and I can follow up and address them during the review of the DPO itself. With all that said, the department recommends that for the general standard of review, council amend condition 27 to require that the facility be designed and operated consistently with the dimensions currently under review, but to relieve the automatic amendment in the future if there were to be minor dimensional changes during final engineering. In addition, the department in condition 27, oh no, not condition 27, condition 117, the department recommends council impose a new condition, condition 117, to establish a repower commencement deadline of 2 years within the execution of the amended site certificate and a completion deadline 3 years following date of commencement. So that's what we were recommending for general standard of review. The next slide is organizational expertise. And for the organizational expertise standard, the department recommends that council amend condition 21 to require the certificate holder to submit progress reports on the status of compliance with the conditions applicable to the repower every 3 months rather than every 6 months, which would afford the department the ability to more closely track compliance status. The increase in frequency of progress reports is based on compliance issues within the last 5 years at FSEC jurisdictional facilities. So that's the reasoning behind the increase in frequency. Next slide, please. For soil protection, the department recommends council impose 4 new conditions as summarized on this slide. Unless there are specific questions from council on these conditions, I'm going to move on to the next standard. These are all rather standard conditions. Next slide, please, Nancy. For retirement and financial assurance, the department recommends council impose a new condition, condition 108, to require the certificate holder submit to the department a bond or letter of credit that addresses the decommissioning amount for the repowered facility. In the DPO, the department suggests a decommissioning cost estimate of a decommissioning cost estimate of $7.9 million. Additionally, the department recommends council impose condition 122 to require the certificate holder describe the status of the bond or letter of credit in their semi-annual reports. Also, condition 122, which would be a new condition, would clarify that the department and council reserve the right to adjust the contingencies as appropriate and necessary to ensure that costs to restore the site are adequate to maintain health and safety of the public and of the environment. Next slide, please, Nancy. For Fish and Wildlife, I'm not going to talk through any of these conditions. They're all general, regular conditions we would have. But they are all new conditions, but as it relates to the repower, but they're all standard condition language. Next slide, please, Nancy. In request for Amendment 3, the certificate holder did conduct field surveys for Washington ground squirrels in 2023 and identified one new active Washington ground squirrel colony. As such, the department recommends council impose 2 new conditions to both require the certificate holder to perform Washington ground squirrel surveys and update maps and flagging in areas of ground disturbance within 1,000 feet of previously identified Washington ground squirrel colonies, and to require the certificate holder to install flagging and temporary fencing extending 150 feet from any Washington ground squirrel colonies identified during the pre-repower Washington ground squirrel spot check. And these 2 conditions would protect the known Washington ground squirrel burrows during pre-construction and construction of the facility repower. Next slide, please, Nancy. So for this amendment request, the certificate holder did conduct intensive pedestrian field surveys following the SHPO guidelines, State Historic Preservation Office guidelines. 7 previously recorded sites in or near the proposed repower corridor were revisited and assessed for general condition and potential NRHP eligibility. The field surveys also attempted to locate 4 previously recorded isolates in the proposed repower corridor, and a historic fence line was located. 2 of the archaeological sites are recommended as likely NRHP eligible, and as such, the certificate holder in the amendment request agreed to avoid direct impacts by installing flagging to demarc and support avoidance of direct impacts to these sites. As such, and the SHPO concurred that the avoidance buffer would ensure that there are no effects to the historic properties. As such, the department recommends that council impose conditions 112 and 126 to align with the certificate holder's commitments made. Additionally, the department recommends council impose condition conditions 113 and 118 to require the certificate holder to review and update the contact information provided in the inadvertent discovery plan, which was included in the RFA, and that updated contact information as imposed in these conditions would come prior to the facility repower. Additionally, these two conditions, 113 and 118, would require the certificate holder and any on-site contractors to adhere to the requirements of the inadvertent discovery plan, which itself is included in the draft proposed order as attachment D. Next slide, please, Nancy. For public services, these three conditions are standard language conditions, and I'm not going to touch on them anymore than this unless there's questions on these three conditions. Next slide, Nancy, please. For the wildfire prevention and risk mitigation standard, this is a standard that was recently adopted by council. It was adopted by council in July of 2022. And this is after the approval of the site certificate and of the past site certificate amendments. As such, compliance with this standard has not previously been evaluated by council, and it is itself applicable to the RFA 3 changes. In the request for amendment, the certificate holder did include a wildfire mitigation plan for construction and operations, which describes the procedures, standards, and timeframes that would be adhered to for inspections and vegetation management. The draft wildfire mitigation plan was included in the draft proposed order as attachment H and establishes the wildfire mitigation measures that would apply during the facility repower and includes a representation that the certificate holder would require its contractor to develop in consultation with the North Gillum Rural Fire Protection District and the Arlington Fire Department a site-specific fire safety plan that would include weather monitoring, personnel training, and emergency response and communication procedures. The department in the wildfire mitigation standard evaluation in the DPO recommends that council impose conditions 115 and 119 to require the wildfire mitigation plan be developed in accordance with the representations of the draft wildfire mitigation plan and require the wildfire mitigation plan be updated as needed throughout the facility repower to address changes in site certificate conditions or wildfire risk at the site. Additionally, the department recommends that council impose condition 129 to require the certificate holder review and report annually to the department on the status of updates to best management practices and technologies, rather than provide sole discretion to the certificate holder for determination when to evaluate and whether to update the plan. Next slide, please, Nancy. For waste minimization, the department recommends council impose condition 130 to ensure that turbine blade and component recycling or reuse is achieved to the maximum extent feasible. And this would reduce solid waste generated from the facility repower. Waste minimization condition 130 requires that prior to facility repowering, the certificate holder submit copies of any agreements or contracts with contractors who will manage the recycling or reuse of wind turbine components. If there are no feasible recycling or reuse options for the wind turbines, then the condition 130 requires the certificate holder to explain the reasons why it is not available and also document the process and final disposal of the components. And this condition would apply during facility operation as well, in circumstances where wind turbine blades or components are damaged, fail, or are decommissioned. And the department also recommends council impose condition 128 for removal fill to apply a 50-meter buffer to two wetlands and two streams unless the Department of State Lands concurs with the wetland delineation for streams 1 and 2. Next slide, please, Nancy. Okay. The draft proposed order and the public notice on the draft proposed order and the complete request for amendment initiated a public comment period. As established in the public notice, the public may provide oral comments tonight or written comments up until 5 o'clock on March 29th. The council will not accept public comments on the request for amendment or on the draft proposed order after the close of the record. Anyone who wishes to preserve their right to request a contested case proceeding must provide comments before the deadline. And failure to raise a relevant issue either orally at the hearing tonight or in a timely manner submitted written comment precludes further participation in the FSEC process. Next slide, please, Nancy. The council may allow the record to remain open for the certificate holder to respond to any public comments received. And because the public comment period will end next week, the department recommends the council keep the record open for that one additional business day for the certificate holder to respond to any comments. And that, again, would be keep the record open until April 1st at 5 p.m. Next slide, please, Nancy. Okay. Persons tonight interested in being considered for party status in the contested case proceeding must meet 2 criteria. The first relates to timing. To be eligible to participate in a contested case on this amendment request, a person must raise an issue either in person tonight or in written comment before the deadline. Again, the council won't accept comments after the close of the record. The second criteria relates to the content of the comments for consideration. In the contested case, issues raised must be within the council's jurisdiction. It must be raised with sufficient specificity so that the council, the department, and the certificate holder understand the issues raised and are afforded an opportunity to respond to the issue or issues. To raise an issue with sufficient specificity, a person must present facts that support the person's position on the issue. And you can go, oh yeah, this is the last one. Okay. No, that was fine. Before granting a request for a contested case hearing, the council must find that the request raises a significant issue of fact or law that is reasonably likely to affect the council's determination whether the facility with the change proposed in the amendment meets the applicable laws and council standards included in chapter 345 divisions 22, 23, and 24. We do have a 10-minute video that describes the type A amendment contested case threshold, and that's available on the department's website, and it's a YouTube link. Council has 3 options when it comes to requests for a contested case. Council may hold a contested case, may remand the proposed order to the department, or deny the request. And with that, I conclude my portion of the presentation for agenda item A, and we'll turn it over to Vice Chair Condon for the second part of this agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. McVeigh Walker, for that presentation. And thank you all for filling this room. Do we need more chairs, or do we want to take a 5-minute break just to do that, or just go forward? I would take 5 minutes just to get people seated.
While we're doing that, does anybody want to provide a comment?
We might need to turn up the air conditioning. This is a public hearing on the draft proposed order on the request for Amendment 3 to the Leaning Juniper 2A site certificate. I, Cindy Condon, FSEC Vice Chair, am serving as the presiding officer for this hearing. Today is March 21st, 2024, and the time is 6:14 p.m. This public hearing is being held at an energy facility siting council meeting in person here in the Oxford room of the Oxford Suites in Hermiston, Oregon. This hearing is also being held via a WebEx webinar with a call-in option for those who cannot participate in person or via webinar. Today's hearing is being recorded. The presentations, written comments, and oral for the amendment request for the facility. The purpose of the public hearing is to provide an opportunity for the public, reviewing agencies, council, and the certificate holder, if they wish to do so, to present oral and written testimony on the amendment request and the department's draft proposal. Record on the draft proposed order March 29th, 2024. This period different from some other hearings that have held that the record closed when hearing to stay open so people can consider comments and presentations today and comment. And hopefully there will be plenty of time to do so. So with that, is there a different slide? Pursuant to OAR 345-027-0367, parentheses 5A and B, please note the following. A person who intends to raise any issue that may be the basis for a contested case must raise the issue in person at the hearing or in a written comment submitted to the Department of Energy before the March 29th, 2024 deadline, and that's 5 o'clock on that date. To afford the council, the Department of Energy, and the certificate holder an adequate opportunity to respond, including a statement of facts that support the person's position on the issue. Review amendment process. Issues eligible for a contested case must be determined by FSEC to, quote, raise a significant issue of fact or law that is reasonably likely to affect council determination of compliance with an applicable standard. To raise an issue in a contested case proceeding, the issue must be within the council's jurisdiction, raised in writing or in person prior to the close of the record of the public comment period, March 29th, 2024 at 5 p.m., and raised with sufficient specificity to afford the council, the Department of Energy, and the certificate holder an adequate opportunity to respond. To raise an issue with sufficient specificity, a person must present facts that support the person's position on the issue. This slide presents the order for tonight's hearing and testimony on the record of the DPO. If attendees wish to submit written comments at the hearing to staff, they may do so prior to the end of the hearing. I will call on each person interested in providing oral testimony, starting with the certificate holder, then members of the public here in person, then on the phone. For any individuals wishing to provide oral testimony during tonight's hearing, for the record, please state the following with your testimony: full name and the spelling, name of organization or group if you are representing one, physical mail or email address. Is the certificate holder here tonight and do you wish to provide testimony? Great.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and good evening, Council. My name is Olivier Jamin. That's Olivierjamin. I'm with Davis Streit Tremaine. I'm counsel for the certificate holder, and I'll let the certificate holder project team introduce themselves.
Good evening. My name is Marcy Patrick, MarcyPatrick. I'm with Avangrid Renewables, the certificate holder, working as an environmental permitting manager.
Hello and good evening. My name is Tyler Hoffber, spelled TYLER HOFFBUHR. I'm a senior permit or development manager for Avangrid Renewables.
And then joining us, not up here with us, but sitting right behind, we also have two members of Avangrid. We have Mark Eilers. He's the lead for Pacific Northwest Development at Avangrid Renewables. And then we also have Jason, who's working as a developer at Avangrid Renewables.
Thank you. So first, we'd like to thank Odo staff for their work on the draft public order and their comprehensive summary they provided as an introduction. The certificate holder is in support of the findings and the proposed conditions in the draft public order, subject to certain comments that we've submitted in a comment letter dated March 15, 2024. I'll go over briefly those comments. They're pretty minor. The first one dealt with table 2 in the draft proposed order, looking at the temporary disturbance by facility component or activity that's being proposed as part of the draft proposed order. As proposed, the language talks about a maximum temporary disturbance. The certificate holder would like the language to reflect a change that would make it an approximate temporary disturbance, subject to a limit with some of the discretion that might be allowed for the certificate holder not to exceed 10% of the approximate disturbance. The reason for this requested change is that the proposed temporary disturbance that the certificate holder evaluated is based on preliminary design, and there might be some changes, later down the road as a construction is undertaken. So this approximate language with some restriction with a 10% would allow some flexibility as design is further developed and gets underway. The second comment that we provided relates to the new recommended condition 122, as well as the recommended amended condition 30, that provides Odo with the right to adjust contingencies, quote, as appropriate and necessary to ensure that costs to restore the site are adequate. specifically would like to get some additional guidance from Odo as to the words appropriate and necessary to better understand what may trigger Odo's discretion in requiring or adjusting the contingency so that certificate holder can better plan and understand what may trigger that right. The two other comments that the certificate holder raised in that letter are pretty minor. One of them relates to the recommended amended condition 27. Currently, the draft proposed order does not reflect the language that was adopted in the site certificate and the amended site certificate. So would like to request that that language from the site certificate be added to the or replaces the current language in the draft proposed order. And the last comment is a minor one in table 3 of the DPO, just correcting a temporary impact ratio from 1:1 to 2:1. So that's it really for the comments that the certificate holder raised before this hearing. Would be happy to answer clarifying questions from the council. Otherwise, would reserve some rebuttal time to answer comments from the public. And as you mentioned, the public comment period is open until the 29th, so we might decide to answer public comments or other questions later next week and take the time to answer those properly. Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. Any questions? Do we go now to questions from the council?
For the record, Todd Cornett, yes. If any council members have any clarifying questions for the comments that were provided by the certificate holder, it would be appropriate to ask those now, but you're not required to. So we, obviously, this being recorded, we're taking notes, we'll make note of all of this. So these go onto the record. So this will also be what the council reviews when the record is totally closed and you're reviewing the draft proposed order. But if you have any clarifying questions, please ask them now.
Vice Chair Condon.
Councillor Grail.
Hi, thank you again for being here. I would just like to say that the comment about what triggers necessary, and I can't remember exactly what else you said, but I think that's something that aligns with what we've talked about frequently in other conversations. So I would just like to say to staff to please pay extra attention to that. I think it saves everyone a lot of unnecessary grief if we could provide some guidance to that.
Madam Vice Chair, yeah, and I think that's appropriate, and I think that would be a good conversation to have when council reviews the draft proposed order, and so that would be potentially, you can have the discussion about that and provide some direction and guidance to us in terms of making any changes necessary to clarify that in the proposed order.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary and Councillor Grail. Councillor Devlin, any comments or questions?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. So, Councillor Beyer.
Thank you again for joining us. And on the waste minimization, which is going to continue to be a big issue, are you comfortable with that language? And any idea on the likelihood of finding a recycler or somebody who can help minimize that waste stream? And it's more curiosity than anything. I think the language as written gives you as a developer some options to address that, but just out of curiosity.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are comfortable with the language as written, with that optionality there. We are exploring recycling methods. We are currently contracting the repowering of the project. And our plan is right now we're working with that contractor to identify recycling facilities and methods on site to break down the blades so we can transport them. So likelihood, I don't have a percentage right now, but to me, I can see the team is doing the work to try to make it happen as best as we can, which is why we're comfortable with that language, because that is our preference to recycle as well.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to public testimony. And before I open the hearing up to that public testimony, I want to remind the public that prior to the close of the record, you may submit written testimony in a variety of ways. The comment portal, email, and handing in your written comment tonight, and We've got blue forms. If anybody in the room wants to comment and doesn't have a blue form, just raise your hand and someone will get it to you. And just keep in mind that you have till March 29th to submit comments. And Nancy, can we maybe show up hands and then we'll get a count of how many people would like to make comments tonight or provide comment? Pretty impressive. You just came to hear. So very impressive. And how about anyone in the webinar or on the phone? Do we need to?
I do not see any hands raised at this time. Let me give directions for people on the webinar or on the phone on how to raise their hand. If you're participating on the webinar, at the bottom of the main window is a set of icons. You're going to click on the participant, and then at the bottom of that window is a hand icon. If you click on that, that will raise your hand, and you'll click it again when you're finished commenting to lower your hand. If you are on the phone, press *3 on your keypad to raise your hand, and then when you're finished commenting, you can press *3 again to lower your hand.
Just give it a minute. I'm just going to roll forward.
Yeah, there are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, seeing no one that wants to make comment in the room or on the webinar or by phone, we'll move on. As previously stated, the comment deadline is March 29th at 5 p.m. The certificate holder will be given until Monday, April 1st at 5 p.m. to provide responses to comments. However, if requested by the certificate holder, the department is authorized to grant them additional time to respond. And does the certificate, other comment?
No further comments.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We're at the council member comment phase now. So if council members want to make any comments, they can, at which point then the certificate holder could
Could
then
comment.
respond to that.
Okay. Councillor Byer.
Certainly, thank you, and thank you again. Just a question for staff. This is a fairly minor amendment with repowering, not a lot of new disturbance, but we do have a couple of new standards, in particular the wildfire standard, and just reviewing some of the council's recent decisions to ensure that there is some consistency there. I understand that different projects have different impacts, but council has spent a fair bit of time looking at our wildfire standards and trying to give better direction to applicants and also help us ensure compliance with those. So wanting to make sure that the DPO that comes back to us has that assessment. The same would apply for organizational expertise, which council has spent a fair bit of time honing in on the conditions for that standard to give better guidance to the applicant on what our expectation is there and the relationship between the parent companies and the LLCs. So making sure that those conditions reflect what the council has already talked about. And as Councillor Grail pointed out, the reclamation bond language, that we really try to define what we mean to give guidance on what that appropriateness test really looks like. So that would be my comment. And I know it's kind of running on, but trying to provide not just consistency, but clarity. So thank you.
Councillor Devlin.
No
Any-
comments on this public hearing. It's the next one that I have comments on.
Vice Chair Condon.
Yes.
Comment.
Counselor Imes?
Yes. Counselor Imes, for the record, thank you for being here tonight. My comments are based on the DPO, specifically page 98, under waste minimization. And I just noticed, throughout that section, on the site certificate that was initially, issued, there was a waste management plan. And, the department is recommending condition 130, which has some good recommendations in there for the applicant to issue notice of contracts and agreements with your different vendors, which is good. And so I just wanted to comment on the fact that maybe a little more information would be useful, I think, for in detail for especially since we had a waste management plan with the first site certificate. So that's the basis of my comment, and it goes back to also subsection B under waste minimization, and that is that the applicant plans to manage the accumulation, storage, disposal, and transportation of waste generated by the construction and operation of the facility are likely to result, we would hope, in minimal adverse effects. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Imes. One more call for any comments or questions from the council. And would you like to respond to any of those questions or comments?
I don't think so at this time. We appreciate the comments from the council. We'll be considering those as we head towards the close of the public comment period. And yeah, again, appreciate staff's work on this and your thoughtful comments tonight, and look forward to continue moving this forward.
Well, again, thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you.
So it is now 6:34 p.m. on March 21st, 2024, and the public hearing on the draft proposed order for the Leaning Juniper Amendment 3 is now closed. The public comment period will close on March 29th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Thank you.
Before I get started, is there anybody in the room who's planning on giving comments on these that hasn't filled out a green form? Raise your hand.
This might be deja vu all over again. Are we ready? The next agenda item is Ridge Renewable Energy Facility East Amendment Number 1, draft proposed order hearing, and will include an information portion provided by Senior Siting Analyst Christopher, who will provide an overview of the agenda item and the amendment request, and public hearing in which I will serve as the presiding officer. Mr. Clark, please proceed when you're ready with the information portion of the agenda item.
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. Council Member Devlin, can you hear me okay? You're the only person I can see online.
Yes, clearly.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, council members. Thank you, members of the public that have come tonight. For the record, my name is Christopher Clark. I'm a senior siting analyst with the department. As Vice Chair Condon mentioned, I will be providing a quick overview, I promise, of the siting process, the approved facility, and the requested amendment. And I'll briefly go over major issues discussed in the draft proposed order on the request for Amendment 1 of the Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility East Site Certificate. Following my presentation, Vice Chair Condon will provide an overview of how the public hearing will be conducted before taking public comments. Comment will be taken in the order presented on the slide. The certificate holder will be provided the opportunity to comment on the draft proposed order or to provide additional evidence or testimony on the record, followed by an opportunity for members of the public to comment, followed by an opportunity for the council to raise any issues or concerns on the record. The certificate holder will then have an additional opportunity to respond. You will hear this several times tonight, but in addition to the opportunity to provide oral comments at the hearing tonight, any person may provide written comment on request for Amendment 1 until 5 p.m. on April 4th. After the close of the public written comment, the department recommends the council leave the record open for the certificate holder to respond to public comments until 5 p.m. on April 8th or later if requested. Slide, please. Great. So this request is being processed under the Type A amendment review process. Chase gave an overview in his presentation. So to cover this briefly, the Type A amendment review process includes several opportunities for public review and participation. Public notice of the receipt of the preliminary request was provided on May 22nd, 2023, shortly after the request submittal. Another public notice was issued on February 29th of this year, concurrently with the issuance of the draft proposed order, which contains the department's initial recommendations to the council on the requested amendment, including recommendations for amended site certificate conditions. As part of the Type A review, we're holding tonight's hearing on the draft proposed order. And as I said, in addition to the opportunity to provide oral comment tonight, written comments will be accepted until 5 p.m. on April 4th. Following the close of the record, the department will review any comments or evidence submitted on the record and will prepare responses for council's consideration at a future council meeting. And after incorporating any feedback from the council, staff will issue a proposed order with staff revised recommendations on the request based on comments received and evidence on the record. After the proposed order is issued, the Type A process allows for a possible contested case proceeding. As will be explained in more detail later on, only those persons who raised a relevant issue on the record of the draft proposed order, either in person at this public hearing or in writing by the comment deadline, may request to participate in the contested case. If held, a contested case proceeding would be overseen by a hearing officer appointed by the council. After the deadline for contested case hearing request has passed, or after the contested case proceeding has concluded, the council will review the proposed order and issue its final order approving or denying the request for amendment. Final orders, findings of facts, and conclusions of law will be based on the proposed order and the outcomes of the contested case proceeding. The department will prepare and the chair will sign the final order and amended site certificate if approved, as approved and directed by the council. Any questions on process before I go on? Thank you. Okay. So this proceeding is on the Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility East. I did want to show that on this slide, the components that are now included in Wheat Ridge East were originally approved to be included in the larger Wheat Ridge Wind Energy Facility. The site certificate for that facility was issued in April 2017 and authorized construction of 500 megawatts of wind components divided into two wind turbine groups, Wheat Ridge West and Wheat Ridge East, that would have been connected by a 31-mile intra-connection transmission line. The Wheat Ridge Wind Energy Facility was administratively divided into Wheat Ridge 1 and 2 in May 2020. The latter, Wheat Ridge 2, contained a portion of the Wheat Ridge West turbine group, solar components added through an earlier amendment, and all of the Wheat Ridge East turbine group and interconnection line. In November 2020, Wheat Ridge 2 was again divided into three daughter facilities, Wheat Ridge 2 retaining the wind components in the Western turbine group, Wheat Ridge 3 containing the solar components, and Wheat Ridge East containing the Eastern turbine group and the interconnection line. Slide, please. So the site certificate for Wheat Ridge East, excuse me, authorizes Wheat Ridge East Wind LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of NextEra Energy Resources LLC, to construct and operate up to 66 wind turbines with a combined maximum nameplate capacity of 200 megawatts and related or supporting facilities, including but not limited to 20 megawatt battery energy storage system within a 4,582 acre site in Morrow and Umatilla County. The certificate holder was deemed to have began construction prior to the administrative division of Wheat Ridge Wind, but none of the components authorized as part of Wheat Ridge East have been built yet. It's important to note. So the department received the preliminary request for Amendment 1 of the Wheat Ridge East Site Certificate on May 16th of last year. We reviewed the preliminary request for completeness, issued a determination that additional information was needed on July 14th, and the certificate holder provided partial responses to the request for additional information on September 1st, October 27th, December 7th, and December 21st. We reviewed all of the RAR responses and determined that the request with the responses and revisions contained within revised exhibits contained sufficient information to make recommendations on all applicable standards, rules, and laws on January 26th of this year. The certificate holder then submitted a complete RFA on January 30th. The department issued the draft proposed order, which is the subject of tonight's hearing, on February 29th, concurrently with a public notice notifying the public of the opportunity to provide comments and establishing April 4th as the deadline for written public comments. As I discussed earlier, the department requested the council hold the record open until April 8th to provide the certificate holder with an opportunity to respond to comments. We will present a complete review of the draft proposed order at a future council meeting, likely the April meeting. The certificate holder has requested that the public review process be expedited to the extent possible. So we're continuing to work on scheduling with them and you to accommodate that request to the extent we can without impacting opportunities for public participation or the council's review. Slide. Great. So you can see a graphic representation of some of the changes proposed in request for Amendment 1 on the slide here. The approved site boundary and micrositing corridor are shown in the dark blue color that kind of runs through the middle of the site there. In RFA 1, the certificate holder proposes to enlarge the site boundary by approximately 74,403 acres, which would result in a total site area of 78,985 acres. That change, which is represented by the dark purple line, would expand the site boundary from the micrositing boundaries of the facility components out to the boundaries of the subject property or the lease property, or lease boundary, excuse me. As shown in the lighter purple filled areas, the requested amendment would also expand micrositing corridors by approximately 10,058 acres, which would result in total micrositing area of 14,640 acres. As you can see, almost all of the expanded micrositing areas are in Morrow County in the area south of Butter Creek. I did want to note, just for the record, that the if you're looking at the version of the presentation that's posted online, this slide did have an outdated figure that contained an additional access road corridor on the eastern side of the site that's no longer proposed. So if you notice a difference, that's why. In addition to the physical changes and changes to the site, I did want to point out the certificate holder also proposes to extend the construction completion deadline by 3 years. That would extend the deadline from May 24th, 2023, the current deadline, to May 24th, 2026. Next slide, please. Okay, so within that enlarged site, the certificate holder proposes to construct up to 41 additional turbines for a total of 107 turbines with a combined generating capacity of up to 300 megawatts. And to serve that larger facility, the certificate holder also proposes to expand the 34.5 kilovolt electrical collection system with underground collector lines and the permanent access road network. And also proposes to reline the 230 kilovolt overhead interconnection transmission line along a newly proposed corridor. As shown in the figure, the new transmission line route, and sorry, it's a little small on the screen in the room, but hopefully those watching along at home can see. Well, the proposed route follows the previously approved route for most of the corridor, with some differences to the west of Spur Loop Road on the western side of the facility. Next slide, please, Nancy. So in addition, the certificate holder proposes to construct and operate a 30 megawatt battery energy storage system, which is 10 megawatts larger than what was previously evaluated. That system would be constructed on a 6.5 acre substation site north of Butter Creek. That's shown on the left in the dark blue square towards the top of the image. The certificate holder also requests authorization to construct a substation at a second site, a second 7 acre site near Little Butter Creek, as shown on the right. Hard to see in this slide as well, but it's a red square. Okay, and next slide, please. Okay, also, as shown on the left, the transmission line would connect the facility to the existing Blue Ridge substation, which is constructed as part of the other Wheat Ridge facilities. The certificate holder also proposes to utilize the operation and maintenance building at Wheat Ridge 2 in lieu of constructing a separate O&M building for this facility. As shown on the right, the certificate holder proposes a new 60-acre temporary construction yard off of Myers Road, which is in the central portion of the site. The certificate holder has requested the flexibility to utilize the 4 previously approved 15 to 20 acre construction yards as well. Great. So that is generally what's in the amendment. Because the proposed amendment proposes to add area to the site boundary and would extend construction completion deadlines, the council must determine that the preponderance of the evidence on the record supports the following conclusions. 1, that the portion of the facility within the area added to the site by the amendment complies with all laws and council standards applicable to an original site certificate application. And 2, after considering any changes in fact or law since the date of the current site certificate was executed, that the entire facility complies with all laws and council standards applicable to an original site certificate application. And finally, that the amount of the bond or letter of credit required for the financial assurance standard is adequate. And together, I will just point out that these findings generally represent, you know, almost a new review of the facility. Where previous findings are still valid, we've made a note of that in the thing, but we have gone through a pretty thorough evaluation with this request. To that same extent, everything in the complete amendment request and the draft proposed order is eligible for comment and subject to review in this proceeding. Slide, please. Okay. So in the draft proposed order along those lines, the department recommends that existing conditions with minor amendments are adequate to ensure that the facility with the changes in proposed in request for amendment 1 complies with the standards shown on the screen. That includes structural, land use, scenic resources, recreation, public services, waste minimization, public health and safety standards for wind facilities, and the siting standards for transmission lines. Accordingly, I won't go over any of those standards anymore in this presentation. If the council does have any questions about those standards, I'd be happy to answer them. If you have comments, of course, you are welcome to provide those comments during the comment period. Okay, great. So we do have substantive findings and new recommended conditions or amended recommended conditions for the remaining standards. I'll try to go briefly over the major issues that we identified. I will try not to go into as much details on these slides. So if you do have questions, please feel free to stop me and let me know. Okay, so under the evaluation of the council's general standard of review, the department does recommend that the council find that subject to compliance with existing and recommended conditions of approval, the facility with the proposed changes does comply with the council standards as well as other applicable laws and rules. I'm going to focus the rest of the presentation primarily on recommendations for new or amended conditions, but I will raise major issues. So also under the general standard, we recommend the council impose a new condition to require a shared use agreement and financial assurance be provided for the shared O&M building, and then to remove or amend conditions that would have only applied to the separate O&M building. We recommend the council authorize the proposed transmission line corridor, and we recommend that the council grant the construction completion deadline extension. However, to comply with the requirements of the administrative rules for deadlines that were approved prior to October 2017, we recommend the council extend the construction completion deadline by 2 years, not 3. Under organizational expertise, many of the standards that we have are similar to other site certificates, so I won't go through them individually. In the request, the certificate holder proposes to continue to rely on the organizational expertise of its parent company, NextEra Energy Resources, LLC. The council has previously found that NextEra has the necessary experience to construct and operate facilities. We have recommended amendments to several conditions to ensure that the certificate holder maintains access to the parent company's resources and to address some compliance issues by requiring enhanced inspections, reporting, and vetting of contractors in some instances. For the soil protection standard, most of the department's recommended changes are related to updates to new guidance from DEQ on best management practices associated with erosion control and the erosion and sediment control plan. We've also recommended the council amend conditions to provide the department with greater authority to mandate changes to the erosion and sediment control plan. But otherwise, those conditions are largely the same. For retirement and financial assurance, the certificate holder estimated that decommissioning the facility with the changes proposed in RFA 1 would cost approximately $27.2 million. The department reviewed the estimate. We found that the methods and unit costs for estimation were reasonable, but we disagreed with the applicant's omission of funds for decommissioning of private access roads. And so our adjusted estimate was $28.4 million. And the department recommends the council update conditions of approval to require assurance based on this amount. For fish and wildlife habitat, the majority of the area proposed to be added to the site boundary is native perennial grassland habitat or other grassland habitats. And aside from occupied Washington ground squirrel habitat, which is considered category 1, the majority of the area is considered category 2 habitat due to its location in big game winter range. As such, mitigation is required for most of the permanent disturbances associated with the request. The DPO recommends the council revise several conditions to incorporate revisions to the habitat mitigation plan, revegetation plan, and weed control plan to address these additional permanent disturbances as well as temporary disturbances in the habitat areas, and update ODFW guidance on survey protocols and other mitigation measures. And I guess just to point out, based on the temporary and permanent impacts of the facility, the total mitigation obligation for this facility, as proposed, is estimated to be 299.2 acres. For threatened and endangered species, the certificate holder did conduct wildlife and botanical surveys at the site, both in support of this request and in the requests and proceedings on other facilities in the area. The surveys do identify Washington ground squirrel colonies within the proposed site boundary. The avoidance of Category 1 occupied Washington ground squirrel habitat required in the site certificate would be maintained. The department has recommended some administrative conditions to condition pre-TE01 related to ground squirrel to incorporate ODFW guidance on survey methodology and what needs to be surveyed. Botanical surveys identified occurrences of Lawrence milkvetch, which is a state listed threatened plant throughout the site. The certificate holder estimates that the construction and operation of the facility as proposed in request for Amendment 1 would result in the disturbance of approximately 50 acres of occupied Lawrence milkvetch habitat. Council previously required avoidance of all occupied Lawrence milkvetch habitat, but did provide for an exception process. As impacts were foreseen here, the department recommends that the council accept a mitigation plan that's similar to what was contemplated through that exception process. And a mitigation plan has been developed in coordination with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And we recommend that the council accept that plan as developed by the certificate holder and the Department of Agriculture. The mitigation actions would include seed collection, propagation, and planting, and would be implemented by the Oregon Department of Agriculture or subcontractors. For historic, cultural, and archaeological resources, pedestrian surveys were conducted for most of the site, and historic and cultural sites and objects were identified within the proposed site boundary. The majority of identified resources are pre-contact rock features that are unevaluated for eligibility in the National Register and therefore considered to be likely eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. The council previously required the certificate holder establish 200-foot avoidance buffers around all likely eligible resources until appropriate mitigation had been approved by the department, and required an archaeological monitor to be present if those buffers were not maintained. In the request, the certificate holder represents that avoidance buffers with that 200-foot buffer would not be maintained for up to 10 sites and 1 objects, but that the resources themselves would not be impacted. So some construction or activity within 200 feet, but not directly impacting the resources. To minimize impacts to those resources, the certificate holder proposes to implement an inadvertent discovery plan, and then to ensure that a tribal monitor or qualified archaeologist is present whenever construction occurs within the 200-foot buffer. That proposal has been discussed with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Cultural Resource Program staff, and the department as well. And the department recommends the council amend site certificate conditions to incorporate the measures. For wildfire prevention and risk mitigation, the council adopted the standard after the previous review of this facility. So all conditions related to wildfire are new. As mentioned before, the majority of the area added to the site is in grassland habitat, and while remote, those grasslands do carry a moderate to high wildfire risk, particularly because there's a higher probability of burning and then of faster spreading fires. The DPO recommends the council impose new conditions to require compliance with the wildfire mitigation plan, and that plan is attached to the DPO. And then finally, for the cumulative effects standard for wind energy facilities, the certificate holder did provide some evidence suggesting that cumulative effects of wind development in the Columbia Plateau ecoregion may result in adverse population level impacts to some sensitive bird and bat species. The certificate holder represented that it was setting back facility components from waterways and sensitive raptor nests in part to reduce those cumulative impacts or their contribution to those cumulative impacts more accurately. And so the DPO recommends the council impose new conditions based on those representations. In addition, additional mitigation for impacts would only be required if fatality thresholds established in the wildlife monitoring and mitigation plan were determined to have been exceeded during post-construction fatality monitoring. Because those thresholds haven't been revisited since 2018, we do recommend that threshold be revised to address potential cumulative effects, and that we would be looking into what the new threshold should be in consultation with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Right. Finally, with regards to other state laws and rules, the DPO recommends that the facility would continue to comply with DEQ noise regulations and Oregon Water Resources Department regulations for groundwater and surface water. The facility, with the changes proposed in request for Amendment 1, would require a removal fill permit. There is I think some impacts from the transmission line and some access roads that would require fill activities. The certificate holder has elected to obtain the required removal fill permit directly from the Oregon Department of State Lands. So rather than have the council make findings on compliance with the removal fill laws, we would recommend the council adopt a condition to require the certificate holder to demonstrate that they've complied, either by obtaining the permit or showing that they no longer need it before beginning construction. Okay, so that was a very quick overview of what's in the DPO. I am happy to go back and revisit anything if anyone has questions. Otherwise, I'll just give some brief comments on public participation and in the hearing tonight. So the issuance of the public notice and the DPO did initiate a public comment period. The public may submit written comments by mail, email, public comment portal, hand delivery, or fax until April 4th at 5 p.m. And may also provide oral comments tonight. The council will not accept public comments on request for Amendment 1 on the DPO after the close of the record. And just to say, failure to raise a relevant issue either orally or at the hearing or timely submitted written comment precludes further participation in the FSEC process, essentially by precluding consideration of that issue in a contested case proceeding. Next slide, please. So the council may allow the record to remain open for the certificate holder to respond to public comments received if requested. As discussed earlier, because the public comment period will end between council meetings, we are recommending the council direct the record to remain open for certificate holder responses until April 8th, 2024 at 5 p.m. and then authorize us to allow a further continuance if requested by the certificate holder. And then finally, just to restate this, that to request a contested case hearing, a person must demonstrate that they provided a comment on the record in person or in writing before the April 4th deadline. They must have raised the issue they seek on the proceeding on the record with sufficient specificity so that the council, the department, and the applicant understand the issues raised and are afforded an opportunity to respond to the issue. And to raise an issue with sufficient specificity, a person must present facts that support the person's position on the issue. Issues that are not within the council's jurisdiction are not eligible for a contested case.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Devlin.
if it's appropriate now, I just had a question on the presentation itself. When I read all the materials for this presentation, the one thing that struck me, it's very clear to me that all the additional inventories that are required or expansion of those inventories are going to be required. The mitigation is going to be required. All the interaction with respect to parties is going to be required. But what really struck me was the expansion of the site boundary. And I know that this is area that appears from the topographical maps I've seen as being largely rolling hills, and there are only going to be certain areas where you'll be able to put wind turbines. but the expansion is from an area that was about 7 miles for the footprint of the project to 116 miles. So about a 17-fold expansion, a relatively modest expansion in about 1/3 expansion in the number of turbines and about a 1/3 increase in the theoretical amount of power produced. But with that level of expansion, do you foresee as the analyst that this site is going to require significantly more monitoring by the council than the previous proposal? I mean, it is a 17-fold expansion in the area being impacted.
Councilmember Devlin, and I'll just make sure it's appropriate to respond. Okay. Yeah, I believe that with the larger site boundary and the expanded energy facility, there would be more monitoring needed, particularly, I think, during construction for erosion control and for noxious weed control, things like that. I think while the obligations for inspections at the larger facility during operations would also be it's more relative to the increase in operating infrastructure. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And
Hope that
second follow-up question. Well, I realize the sites for the various, well, the number of turbines is limited. And they've obviously selected the best sites that meet their requirements and meet the other requirements that we have. Is there anything in the proposal that would give you the impression that there may be a future expansion within this 116 square mile area?
Councilmember Devlin, I am probably not the best person to respond to that particular comment, but since the certificate holder is in the room with us, I believe they possibly could.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Devlin. And we've got another comment from Councillor Grail.
Thank you. Chris, I'm not sure that I heard you correctly, so I would like to ask you. I think I heard you say the certificate holder seeks, and I'm going to say expedite it, but I don't know that's the word that you used. And then you mentioned public comment, and I don't know if I combined that in my own head or what. And so I just would like to ask that, and then perhaps a clarifying question if you could respond to that.
Yes, Councilmember Grail. I did say expedited. That isn't intended to be a formal term, like it's an expedited review or a special criteria facility. It just means that they would like the council's decision to be as soon as possible, so they can begin construction as soon as possible. We have not made any changes to our public comment period length or duration, and we have tried to give the council also as much time as you need to review the facility. Obviously, if you feel like you need more time, that is your decision. So,
thank you,
Mr. Secretary.
For the record, Todd Cornett. We've been in communication recently with council members about changing the May meeting, and so as Chris referenced, expediting. Essentially, we were looking at what are the opportunities to try to get this through the review process faster, assuming everything goes, no contested case, no significant, comments that take lots of time, responses by the certificate holder that they then ask for additional time. So assuming everything goes as smoothly as possible, this is also why we requested and sought input on potential different dates for the May meeting, because even though it extended out the May meeting by 2 weeks, that actually creates a little more space to get the facility potentially, or this amendment potentially a final decision by council earlier than it would have normally, just based on the way the deadlines hit, rather than waiting until the June meeting. It allowed us to have potentially the council's review at the May meeting. So that's what Chris is referring to.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Sorry. Chair. Counselor, Counselor Grail, do you have just a follow-up, just to?
I do. And so Christopher, if this isn't for you, that's fine. I can wait for the certificate holder. So my question is, are they prepared to go to work immediately if they're like, let's go? Are they ready?
Councilmember Gale, that is what they have indicated to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will say there is still pre-construction compliance that will be ongoing after that, but I believe they have already started to prepare and get information ready. So,
Thank you. Counselor Byer?
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. Just to clarify, this is not to do away with any public comment opportunities. It puts a different calendar for the council, but we have tried to build in extra time for the public to comment on all our proposals because it gives the council a better information to make our decisions. So the word expedite is probably the wrong word because we aren't shortchanging the public input period. That's very important to us. And we really value any of the comments that we get because you think of questions that we just don't think of. So thank you, Chris, for your presentation. And this is, compared to our last amendment, this is a big expansion. And so it really is almost an evaluation of the project from almost ground zero in terms of the standards and the plans that are required to be updated. So thank you for your thorough review.
email, Councilmember.
Counselor Devlin, any further?
No, not at this time, Madam Chair.
Counselor Imes, anything further? Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your presentation this evening.
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon.
There we go. This is the public hearing on the draft proposed order on the request for Amendment 1 to the Energy East Site Certificate. I, Cindy Condon, Vice Chair for this hearing. Today is March 21st, 2024. The time is 7:14 p.m. This public hearing is being held at an Energy Facilities Siting Council meeting in person here in the Oxford Room of the Oxford Suites in Hermiston. This hearing is also being held via a WebEx webinar with a call-in option for those who cannot participate in person or via webinar. Today's hearing is being recorded. The presentations, written comments, and oral testimony are part of the decision record for the amendment request for the facility. The purpose of the public hearing is to provide an opportunity for the public, reviewing agencies, council, and the certificate holder, if they wish to do so, to present oral and written testimony on the amendment request and the department's draft proposed order. The 35-day record of the public hearing comment period on the draft proposed order includes the hearing tonight and is scheduled to close next Friday, April 4th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Pursuant to OAR 345-027-0367, parentheses 5A and B, please note the following. A person who intends to raise any issue that may be the basis for a contested case must raise the issue in person at the hearing or in a written comment submitted to the Department of Energy before the April 4th, 2024 deadline, and specificity to afford the council, the Department of Energy, and the certificate holder an adequate opportunity to respond, including a statement for the person. Review amendment process, issues eligible for a contested.
Madam Vice Chair, sir, can I get you to switch with Councilmember Grail? It seems like your battery's cutting out.
In a Type A review amendment process, issues eligible for a contested case must be determined by FSEC to, quote, raise a significant issue of fact or law that is reasonably likely to affect, unquote, council determination of compliance with an applicable standard. To raise an issue in a contested case proceeding, the issue must be within the council's jurisdiction, raised in writing or in person prior to the close of the record of the public comment period, April 4th, 2024 at 5 p.m., and raised with sufficient specificity to afford the council, the Department of Energy, and the certificate holder an adequate opportunity to respond. To raise an issue with sufficient specificity, a person must present facts that support the person's position on the issue. This slide presents the order for tonight's hearing and testimony on the record of the DPO. If attendees wish to submit written comments at the hearing to staff, they may do so prior to the end of the hearing. I will call on each person interested in providing oral testimony, starting with the certificate holder, then members of the public here in person, then on the webinar, then on the phone. For any individuals wishing to provide oral testimony during tonight's hearing, for the record, please state the following with your testimony: full name and spelling, name of organization or group if you are representing one, and your physical mail or email address. I think we know that the certificate holder is in the room. Would you like to make comment tonight? Come forward. And while they're coming forward, just a reminder for people that would like in the room who would like to make comment, there are green forms that you can raise your hand and somebody will bring a form to you. We've got 2 now. So thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. David Lawler. I represent, I'm in the development team for NextEra Energy Resources, LLC, and I oversee Northwest Development.
Thank you.
Oh, LAWLOR, David.
Thank you.
DAVID, sorry.
I'm Sarah Twitchell. I'm the environmental permitting lead for the Pacific Northwest at NextEra Energy Resources, SARATWITCHELL.
And good evening, Vice Chair. My name is David Filippi. That's spelled DAVID. Last name is FILIPPI. I am an attorney with Stoll Reeves in Portland, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you.
We first just want to thank the council for reviewing our application. Thank the staff for the work that they put in, and we are interested in hearing the comments of the public both tonight and throughout the public comment period. We were mainly here to listen and to receive the comments. A couple of things had come up in previous. You could either ask the questions again, or I can go in. The first one is about the site boundary. Just want to point out the site boundary went from just the micrositing corridor. That's why it was 4,000. The actual leased parcels were almost 42,000 acres originally. And what we've done is just gone to the leased boundary. And then within there, that as Chris had pointed out, are the microsited corridors, and those are an increase of 10,000 acres. Okay. And so it, in a sense, apples to apples, it's 4,600 or so to 14,600. And as one of the council members pointed out, it is, I would put it as very balsamic ridges. So, or not balsamic.
Basalt.
Yes, basalt. Sorry, basalt ridges. That was.
I was trying to visit.
Yes, I don't know if that is a slip of tongue because I'm a little hungry. No, I'm joking. But that is that's the reason you can only get up certain places up to the ridges where in a sense the wind is, and that's I just wanted to point that out. And other than that, we don't have any other where we will be providing some written responses to the DPO, but there's nothing particularly that we have comments for tonight. And so with that, you have our names. I believe, I just wanted to confirm, we would now step down as other public comments happen, and then we have an opportunity if we elect to come back up. Is that
Just before you step down,
Sorry.
just because there were
Oh, yeah.
some questions and comments earlier, if I can go to Councillor Devlin first, do you have some questions of the applicant?
No, I think the applicant addressed my issue, and I realize that there'll be more impact in the area during construction, that once this is constructed, the actual impact on many of those areas, particularly the extra leased areas, is going to be minimal. I was interested I know that they've investigated probably very thoroughly what are the best sites for their facilities. Do you see any future expansion within that footprint?
not at this time within this footprint?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Grail, did you want to go further? Councillor Byer?
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. Just if we could ask staff to clarify in the DPO, the micrositing, that the layout of the actual impact area. I think the table summaries that showed disturbed areas were very helpful, but to your point, to make it clear that micrositing is here and impact area is a different issue. So that's good clarification. And if the DPO can reflect that, that would be helpful. Did that make sense? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Byer and Secretary Cornett.
Yeah, for the record, Todd Cornett, yes. Thank you, Councilmember Byer. And so between the draft proposed order and then based on comments that we received tonight and through the close of the record, and then also including the council's review of the DPO, we'll certainly make note of that. And then, good, better clarification within the proposed order. Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, now you may step down.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yes. And before I open the hearing up to public testimony, I want to remind the public that prior to the close of the record, you may submit written testimony in a variety of ways: the comment portal, email, and handing in your written comment tonight. So I do have two green forms for people in the room who want to provide testimony. Are there more that I don't have? Okay. So we're not going to set a time limit because we've only got two right now. So I'm just going to call you up. So Wendy King. Yeah. And thank you for being here tonight. And if you could state your name and spell it, that'd be great.
Yes. On camera. I have my notes here, but I need to make sure you can hear me. Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Wendy King, Wendy King. My family's Century Farm is located on Little Better Creek in Morrow County, just north of Gleason Butte. Gleason Butte is the site to multiple wind towers proposed through Wheat Ridge East, EFA 1. The peak of Gleason Butte is approximately 3,189 feet above sea level. It is the highest peak in the northern half of Morrow County. Gleason Butte can be seen for many miles away and from many viewpoints along Interstate 84, just east of Boardman, through the Echo exit. The butte is visible for the majority of Highway 207 as it parallels Big Better Creek. It is approximately 5.5 miles south of Myers Farm. The presence of wind turbines on our view shed wrecks our enjoyment of our property with countywide vistas that are pleasing to our working family. Here's where I have issue. Even though Morrow County Planning Commission has not protected this landmark, many of our community consider it an aesthetic scenic value. I doubt Morrow County saw the need to protect many of its natural scenic resources because they just didn't anticipate there would be an issue, or they never thought to ask the community. Because this impact may be felt more by viewers from Umatilla County, perhaps it was never considered important to Morrow County. To allow wind turbines to outreach the peak of Gleason Butte will destroy its natural beauty. The blinking red beacons visible even at night will remind us of its presence. Building these turbines on top of and to the north of this beautiful landmark can be remedied by excluding any turbine whose blade reaches above the peak of 3,189 feet above sea level. My opposition comes in part from the impacts to our family Century Farm from the sitting of the 500 kV transmission line B2H that is slated to cross through our dry land wheat operation, passing just over 1/2 mile from our homestead, causing a substantial increase in aerial chemical application costs and impacts to croplands adjacent to the line, loss of our ability to use our airstrip and hangar our father built, and the tremendous emotional distress from the FSAC and PUC processes that we participated in and received little consideration. At this point, I would like to say I think that siting was extremely important for energy transmission versus energy production, and that may be characterized here. My point here is that the Energy Facility Siting Council so far has no notice of the cumulative impacts of siting facilities in our community. Solar, wind, and transmission construction and laborers could collide in a short time frame. And how is our rural community going to be impacted? Not to mention the lack of consultation with Morrow County Road Department to adequately plan for multiple projects sharing roads at the same time. Many of these roads are characterized as open range, giving livestock and farm equipment right of way. In closing, I ask that you consider the impacts to our working farm and the many working families of our community that will look at these towers each day. We ask Wheat Ridge a small concession of excluding towers from our view shed of Gleason Butte that will provide some relief while we cope with the presence of a 500 kilovolt transmission line to our north. Our Century Farm is an agriculture operation surrounded by 8 energy projects on all sides. We've been approached by solar developers to use our land, and we simply desire to continue farming and ask for consideration to limit negative impacts to our enjoyment of our property and livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
Yes.
Secretary Cornett.
Sorry for the record. While we're recording this, it would be very helpful if you submitted the information as well. So whether you submit that today or submit it, through email, we would appreciate since you did read that, it would be helpful for us to have it in a
The ad lib part.
that would be fine as well. But yeah, just it is helpful for us to get the written comments as well as the oral comments. So not a requirement, but very much appreciated.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. And Sam Myers? Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. My name is Sam Myers, SAMMYERS. I'm a local resident there on Little Butter Creek. I do have some concerns with this amendment. The expansion is sort of an issue to me, and I'll explain more later. But Gleason Butte is also a view shed that my sister referenced. I've taken probably hundreds of pictures of that as an amazing backdrop to our farm. And I'm asking the council to, again, at least move the towers that were positioned on the peak to maintain sort of the peak's landmark status. It's disappointing that this particular butte was never listed as any kind of important landmark. It should have been. I'd be happy to do that, or request the commissioners in Morrow County to do that if that would help. I couldn't help notice the scenic standard. So apparently not having any registration, it passes. Again, I ask, can the council make some recommendation that even though it's not formally listed as a landmark or a view shed, that it be treated as such? I'm also very concerned in the expansion of this project that the expanse of some additional 50 miles of access roads present a weed problem and a fire hazard at the same time. The roads are so rural in this area. It's going to take time and effort to get to these places. I can only imagine requiring a staff of 3 to 4, maybe more people. That's what it would take to actually address the weeds that occur, not necessarily during construction, but soon after. And if construction takes years, then it's then too. But it's an ongoing effort. I know the effort personally because I maintain, you saw a brief picture of Little Butter Creek. I end up managing almost a mile of that paved road because the county only comes out once a year, maybe. So in June, July, Kosha will take off because any rain we did get, the principle that happens is that the water sloughs off the road onto the shoulder. So instead of being in a 10-12 inch rainfall area, that produces an area that's more the equivalent of a 15 or 18 inch. So these weeds capture that moisture that's drifted off the side of the road and they take off. And what I've experienced, I have to almost rename the road the Kosha Corridor because it is lined with kochia weeds that are 4 to 6 feet tall and spaced a foot apart. So it's a challenge at best. It's a nightmare normally to deal with this because the plant itself can produce upwards of 1 million seeds. So it's going to proliferate. It's going to drift into the neighboring cropland. It's going to destroy the fences because the stalks are so big. They don't go away for years. They produce a fire hazard because the skeleton is so big. If a fire does go through there, it'll exacerbate the length of the fire flame because there's so much material to burn. If kochia gets started on some of these access roads, it's going to make everything much harder and it's going to elevate the fire risk. My experience with B2H and Idaho Power is that somehow the council passed on a weed control portion of that proposed order. When that got in front of Morrow County's weed specialist, it was a mess. And because I dealt with him personally, like, what is the deal with this? They're pressuring me to sign off on a weeds package that's not even close to what we need here. It put extreme amount of pressure on the weeds supervisor for Morrow County, and it took time to develop something working with Idaho Power. Now, I'm not saying the two developers that we're dealing with are the same. All I'm saying is if a weed management program survived the council, but by the time it got to the county level was not effective or acceptable at all, because the local people know what happens. I'm questioning, is that going to happen here? Is a weeds management tool from the project leaders, is it really gonna maintain control of the weeds, or are we facing another battle as they want, I'm assuming, the county level to sign off on that particular strategy, whatever is in the proposed order. So that is a huge concern of mine. And I've faced the I faced the disappointment of trying to bring relevant fire information to this council, and it wasn't accepted. I'm hoping that somehow the data that was rejected has been reanalyzed. It was good to hear the ODOD personnel just ahead of us talk about the speed and the likelihood that the flammability of this area. Just for your knowledge, in that aspect, Morrow County produced a online document where they summarized the fires that have occurred in Morrow County for the 6 years between 2013 and 2018. So I did the math. On average, each of those years in the middle part of the county, which is where this siting council is at, 4.2 acres, 4.2 square miles of acres burned per year, to the tune of 160-some thousand acres over the course of 6 years. So this is we've already fought fire near this thing last fall from a distribution line the bird got tangled up in, and there was over 6 vehicles fighting that fire, and it took 6 hours, and that was on a relatively calm evening. So fire can get out of control in this area. It's a mountainous, rolling hills. It's difficult to fight. That is a big deal. And this environment needs special consideration when it comes to fire control, fire suppression. So much of this area has no infrastructure currently, none whatsoever. And so all we have to look forward to, honestly, is more fires, because it's going to have more infrastructure, more susceptibility to human caused and or lightning caused. At current, I think the fire program that they put out said in this mid part of the county, 70% of the fires are from lightning. So if we have more things sticking up in the sky, I'm kind of under the assumption that we're going to have more lightning strikes and those can start fires. So those are my big concerns, that whatever is in the draft proposed order having to do with weed control and or fire suppression or all of that combined, that's given a really deep review. And if you need to coordinate with Morrow County or frankly some of the other counties, what they're doing in addition to maybe what you're recommending, that those be brought into this particular review. This is a very difficult area to fight fires in, and it's so remote, it's hard to get to some of these areas. And then with the various components that are going to make it probably people are going to be less able to fight fire because of they're not sure how close they should be to certain structures or whatever. But my father was hopeful to have wind towers. All the farms, I understand that, all the farms in this area are hoping that wind will be a financial stability for them. and we have wanted that too, but it's never worked for us. So I'm not opposed to the project in general. I'm just saying it has to be done correctly. It has to be done with respect. And I would really appreciate that the Gleason Butte area would survive that if we can when towers bundle them differently. I would really appreciate that. But I do hope that the council is hearing my tone, is that there are some real specific considerations that need to be managed properly moving forward. And I appreciate letting me hear my story tonight. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you for being here, Mr. Myers. And before you get up, anybody have a question? If not, I do, and I think it's appropriate for me to ask a question as the council member. So you said you submitted some fire information. Was that a part of this process, or can you just provide it? Oh, on B2H, and it was rejected. So if you have fire information, and our wildfire standard is relatively new, so I encourage you to submit anything you
that
have.
was an unfortunate issue, in that you were the one that supported me in that at that moment.
Okay.
And so I appreciated that. I drove to Lexington, gave my 3-minute testimony, and you wanted more information, as the record showed that I've seen prior. And I would have loved to have seen that gone a different direction. But
well, facts do matter in these
yes,
hearings. And so
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a new standard, a relatively new standard. So we're all learning through it. So thank you so much for being here. Councillor Devlin?
No additional comments or questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Oh, we have one more. Yeah. Thank you. James Cutsforth.
James Cutsforth, yes. I have a farm in Wheat Ridge 2 that has towers on it. So I can address some of the concerns that you've heard previously. Number one, fire protection. I mean, you're going to build 56 miles of all-purpose, all-weather roads into an area that has no access. So you're going to really help firefighting, because you're going to provide the access. The tower, the service roads will be access roads where there are none. And that country is long ways between draws and a lot of country. So it'll make a big difference with fighting fire. As far as weed control, we've been working with NextEra hand in hand, rewriting and Tetra Tech, their consultants, addressing and trying to build. Well, we're not trying to. We're building better weed control plans, move forward, and they've been very supportive, and Tetra Tech has been very supportive, and we've got a lot of input from local people. We've had the county weed master involved. We've had the NRCS involved. Everybody in the local has had input. So and their applicator, and it's a learning curve, because it's not something that they've really addressed before. It doesn't appear. I mean, they have, but at a 30,000 foot level, not on the ground. And so they're getting good experience. I wholeheartedly, I'm not worried about them moving forward on weed control. I think they've got a handle on it, and they're good in the community. They're good. So that's basically.
Thank you, Councillor Grail.
Hi.
Thank you for coming.
You bet.
Sorry.
Nope. Oh, sorry.
You said NRCS.
The Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Thank you. My brain and acronyms right now is overloaded.
the-
Thank you.
Department of Agriculture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Thank you, Mr. Cutsworth, for being here this
I
evening.
guess another recommendation. I would recommend that they take an opportunity to meet with the local fire districts, and I think it's Hepner has most of that area, to learn where they can protect and where they can't.
And
and
they,
they're-
meaning Nextera?
Nextera,
Okay.
yeah. Once they get the project completed, it would be probably be good use of time to plan that out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And now, anybody on WebEx on the webinar? If you're on the webinar, use the raise your hand feature.
There's no one with their hand raised at this time, but I will go ahead and remind members of the public how to participate. So if you're on the webinar, at the bottom of the main window is a set of icons. Click on the participants, and at the bottom of that window, there is a hand icon. And you click on that to raise your hand, and when you're finished commenting, you can click it again to lower your hand. If you are on the phone, you're going to press *3 on your keypad to raise your hand, and when you're finished commenting, you can press *3 again to lower your hand. I do have Fuji Kreider on the line. Fuji, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your mic. You are ready to comment.
Thank
Hello?
you, Ms. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've had my hand up for a while and you're saying I'm not here, but I'm here. Okay, you ready?
We've got you now.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Fuji Kreider, FUJIKREIDER, 60366 Marvin Road, LeGrand, Oregon. I'd like to speak tonight as a community-minded and engaged Oregonian. Most of you know me as a member of the Stop B2H Coalition. But I'm not speaking on behalf of the coalition tonight. We just didn't have the time or the bandwidth for this. But I want to speak to some things just as a citizen. We have a huge collective problem. It's called climate change. We also have long-standing traditions and laws in our state for land use planning and protection of our natural and cultural resources. Can these be addressed with the same solutions, or is one ordained to overshadow the others? My comment tonight is not exclusively of this RFA 1, but I will get there. First, I want to address the council with a plea that I am sure the staff will say is out of your jurisdiction. Have you driven around Umatilla, Morrow counties in a while? I urge you to do so. You will see the willy-nilly stringing of transmission lines and access roads, obviously a product of piecemeal facility siting, then trying to stitch it all together with transmission lines and substations. Once the developer gets the site certificate, the amendments just keep coming. There's a lack of certainty that the county planners can get from FSAC, and the agencies keep approving projects and allowing amendments to expand facilities so that multiple ones overlap. Essentially, poor energy siting. What can you, as the Energy Facility Siting Council, do to help Oregon reach its decarbonization goals and ensure an adequate energy supply while safeguarding Oregon's environment, public health, and safety? The latter is as your mission states. But unfortunately, you're limited in your ability to accomplish this mission. I have come to the conclusion, having engaged in NEFSAC for years, that you are too limited in your standards-based decision-making to make the best decisions for the people, wildlife, and even developers. Your decision-making approach is too siloed within the standards. You cannot talk about cumulative impacts because you don't have a standard for that. You cannot discuss climate change or climate-related impacts to soils or other resources because you don't have a standard for that. The solutions we need to assure our energy supplies are complex. Too complex for decision-making to operate in a silo of rules and standards. We need at least one additional standard as soon as possible, ASAP, and that is cumulative impact. The feds have it in their NEPA processes, and many other state agencies consider it as well, but FSEC does not. Without it, you can see the results. Fragmentation, just drive around, like I said. To be fair, some of this has also been the results of the counties and individuals' request or just request for revenue from siting energy facilities and data centers. Umatilla Electric Co-op has become the largest carbon-based electrical supplier per customer in the state, almost all for data centers with their green environmental standards. It's ironic, eh? Renewable energy facilities next to data centers, and we need to import carbon-based energy. Now that's planning. It's not all your siting decisions that got us to this place. However, now with this RFA1, I urge you to reconsider the siloed thinking and analysis for the good of the people and our resources. The Wheat Ridge East facility has not been built. The Boardman to Hemingway transmission line has not been built. B2H has amendments pending, and there will likely be more for both of these projects before they break ground. They are both working in the same area. What would be in the best interest of possibly all developers in the area, but certainly in the public's interest, would be to direct the developers to communicate at minimum, share information as much as possible, and or at best, actually try to work out a win-win situation with the developers, the landowners, the interest groups, and the state. Possibly co-locating transmission corridors or other ways they could reduce the cumulative impact to both fragmentation of farms and natural resources. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
That's my comment.
Thank you, Ms. Kreider, for being here and providing
welcome.
testimony. Council members, any questions? Thank you. One last call for comments. Okay, no comments from the council. So, as previously stated, the comment deadline is April 4th at 5 p.m. The certificate holder will be given until Monday, April 8th at 5 p.m. to provide responses to comments. However, if requested by the certificate holder, the department is authorized to grant them additional time to respond. And does the certificate holder have any further comment tonight in response to the comments made by the public?
Just so that it's on the record.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Not at this time. We thank everyone for their comments and we'll be reviewing them and providing written response. So thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for being here. So,
Chair Condon?
yes.
Are you going to do council comments soon, or did you already
Oh,
go through that?
I thought I already did it, but if there are counselor comments, please go right ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. I do have a comment regarding wildfire mitigation. In the DPO under OR 340221115, you'll see the staff's recommendations there for wildfire mitigation, and specifically my comments are about procedures, standards, time frames that the applicant will use to inspect the facility components and manage vegetation in the areas identified under subsection A. I found when reviewing that section, there was a lack of detail. Specifically on page 5 of the wildfire mitigation plan, I think it's attachment H in the DPO. Section 3.2.2, the applicant must provide operational procedures and inspections. And when we get to that point in there, it doesn't have very much information or quite a bit of lack of evidence on what the plan is. Also in section 3.25 on page 8, There is some information provided on training, but the training refers to a program known as RACE, and it's in that program, there's no evidence that local responders will be included in the training or in the site inspection, or how often the trainings will occur, or who will be responsible for the RACE program. I'm also wondering about the local capacity, the local fire responders and what their capacity is to be able to respond to fires, and how they've been engaged in the process. Also, in your wildfire mitigation plan, there was no mention of a routine anchor bolt inspection. I also want to point out that it's interesting. I'm new here, by the way, and so this is my first time looking at two amendments side by side. And I noticed with the prior amendment with Leaning Juniper that their fire wild mitigation plan was much more comprehensive than the one that we're reviewing in the Wheat Ridge East amendment. So I see some inconsistencies there across the board, and that does concern me. This is a new the wildfire is a new standard, and so I can understand that it's probably challenging for consultants to navigate that new standard. But at the same time, I think it's very important that we have a consistent baseline approach to these fire mitigation plans when they're presented to the council and the staff for review as well. And I know that takes a team effort with staff and the consultant. So those are my comments for today. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Imes. And because that was a comment made after, would you like to respond the the certificate? Okay. Right. Thank you very much for that. So now it is now 7:59 p.m. on March 21st, 2024, and the public hearing on the draft proposed order for the Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy East Amendment number 1 is now closed. The public comment period will close on April 4th, 2024 at 5 p.m. The time is now still 7:59 p.m. and the March 21st.
Madam Vice Chair, if I may, before we conclude for recess for tomorrow, I would just like to acknowledge in the audience, longtime Energy Facility Siting Council member Brian Wolf, also long-term chair of the Energy Facility Siting Council, Brian Wolf. So just wanted to get on the record that Mr. Wolf is in the audience. We appreciate his being here tonight. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for being here. So I'm not sure I finished my statement. So the time is now 8 o'clock p.m. and the March 21st, 22nd, 2024 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is now recessed until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.